I will tell you about my brother, who was the most methodical, most controlled, most infuriatingly certain man in 3 counties, and about the single autumn in which a debtor's daughter and an 82-year-old woman with a cane dismantled every one of his certainties, brick by careful brick. I watched the whole of it. I was, in fact, the only witness who truly appreciated it, and I have been dining out on the memory for 11 years. My brother Cassius, 6th Duke of Thornhallow, had a system. He had a system for everything. He rose at 5, reviewed correspondence by 6, inspected the home farm by 7, and had disposed of 3 counties' worth of estate business before the rest of the world had finished its tea. He managed Thornhallow Park, the house, the grounds, the tenants, the staff of 42, and whatever remained of our family's complicated finances, with the precision of a man who has decided that precision is the only thing standing between himself and catastrophe. He was not wrong exactly. Our father had been a genius at spending money and a catastrophe at everything else, and Cassius had spent 15 years undoing the man's cheerful ruin. The system was the result. The system did not include women. He had been briefly and unhappily engaged, some years before the autumn I am recounting, to a woman of excellent family and no particular warmth, and she had broken the engagement on the grounds that she would rather marry a man who occasionally looked at her. Cassius had not contested the point. He had added matrimonial proceedings to the list of things the system would manage eventually, and returned to the home farm. Our grandmother, Euphemia, the Dowager Duchess of Thornhallow, had her own system. It was considerably older, considerably less documented, and considerably more effective. She had been managing this family since before Cassius was born, and she intended to manage it for some time yet. When she wrote to me in late October to say that she had engaged a new companion and that I ought to come for the autumn, the tone of the letter was the particular one she used when she wanted a witness. I came. I arrived at Thornhallow on a Thursday afternoon, and I found the household in its customary state of efficient quiet. Cassius met me in the hall not because he had been waiting, but because his schedule brought him through the hall at that hour. He shook my hand. He inquired after my journey. He told me dinner was at 7. I loved my brother, but I sometimes found him exhausting before I had even taken my coat off. "Grandmother's new companion," I said, fishing. "What's she like?" Cassius looked at me with the expression he used for irrelevant questions. "I have no particular opinion," he said. "She arrived Tuesday. She reads to grandmother in the evenings. She seems adequate." I stored that away. Mrs. Auld Vane was not adequate. She was sitting in the west drawing room when I found her, reading aloud from a book of natural philosophy while my grandmother embroidered, and occasionally corrected her pronunciation of the Latin. She was perhaps 24, with the kind of composed, steady face that belongs to people who have been managing difficult circumstances long enough that difficulty no longer surprises them. She was not beautiful in the obvious fashion. She was not the golden, laughing sort of beauty that filled ballrooms and stopped conversations. She was something quieter, a quality of attention, of stillness, of intelligence moving behind steady gray eyes. When she looked up from the book to greet me, it was without either the anxiety of someone eager to impress or the performance of someone who has been told she ought to be impressive. "Lord Aldous," she said, "your grandmother has spoken of you with great affection and very little restraint." "I hope you have not been unduly alarmed," I said. "On the contrary," she said, "it prepared me to enjoy your visit." My grandmother was watching us over her embroidery with the expression of a woman monitoring an experiment. I had known that expression since childhood, and it told me very clearly that Miss Isolde Vane was not here to read natural philosophy. She was here because my grandmother had decided she was precisely what was needed, and that the only person in the house who had not yet been informed of this was the one who most needed to know. I found Cassius in the library after dinner. He was at his desk with the estate ledgers, which meant he was not to be disturbed. I disturbed him anyway. "She's remarkable," I said, settling into the chair opposite. "Miss Vane," I said helpfully. Cassius looked up. He had the expression of a man who is very carefully not reacting to something. "She is a companion," he said. "She is here to read to grandmother and assist with correspondence. I have spoken with her twice." "You noticed she was remarkable twice, then?" "I did not say that." "You didn't say she was not remarkable, either." He returned to the ledgers. "Aldous," he said, "you have been here 4 hours and you are already attempting to arrange my life. Give it a week at least." "I gave it a week," It was an excellent week. Miss Vane had been hired, ostensibly, because my grandmother's eyes had weakened, and she wished to have someone read to her in the evenings. This was true. She had also, I suspected, been hired because she came from a family whose circumstances had been reduced. Her father's debts had taken the house and most of the income 3 years prior, and she had been making her way as a companion and occasional governess since. And because my grandmother, who had excellent taste in people, had interviewed 15 candidates and found only one whose company she actually wished to keep. What my grandmother had not shared with Cassius, not directly, was that she had also spent the better part of September writing carefully worded letters to the families of several eligible gentlemen who were likely to call at Thornhollow before Christmas, and who now knew, by a series of apparently unrelated remarks in apparently unrelated conversations, that there was a remarkable young woman of good character and distinguished manners resident at the park. The scheme was elegant, and from my vantage point, delightful. Cassius knew nothing of the letters. He knew only that his grandmother's companion was intelligent, that she did not take up excessive space in rooms he was trying to work in, and that she had on one occasion corrected something he had said about the drainage of the south field. Correctly, as it turned out, because she had read the survey report my grandmother had accidentally on purpose left in the morning room, and that this correction had irritated him considerably, which he was also not admitting. I watched him not admit it across the dinner table. I watched him not admit it in the long gallery, where he preferred to take his after-dinner constitution, and where, coincidentally, Miss Vane often accompanied my grandmother on her evening walk, their voices preceding them down the corridor like a thread of sound that my brother occasionally turned toward without. He would have insisted any particular intention. The first gentleman arrived in the second week of November. His name was Mr. Hartwell Soane, and he was the younger son of a baronet from the next county, personable and moderately clever and very obviously hopeful. He called 3 times in 5 days. On his second call, I observed him sitting beside Miss Vane at tea while my grandmother watched from her chair with the serene expression of a woman playing chess. On his third call, I observed my brother standing at the window of the adjacent room for a period of time that could not be attributed to any item in the estate schedule. That evening I found Cassius in the long gallery, earlier than usual. "Mr. Soane called again," I remarked. "I am aware," Cassius said. "Grandmother enjoys visitors." He spent most of the hour talking to Miss Vane. She is, as I understand it, a person one can talk to. He seemed to find her so. Cassius walked the length of the gallery in silence. Then he said, with the careful neutrality of someone choosing every word, "She has had a difficult few years. If his attentions are genuine and his circumstances are reasonable, it would be a sound thing for her." "Very generous of you," I said. "It is not generosity. It is an ordinary observation." "Of course," I said, "my mistake." He walked back the other way. Then he said, "What did they talk about?" I told him. The conversation had covered the management of a wool tenancy, the merits of a particular agricultural journal, and a piece of music Miss Vane had heard at a neighbor's house the previous winter. Cassius listened to this with the expression of a man memorizing a route he has decided not to take. He wished me good night and went to bed 20 minutes earlier than his schedule required. I reported to my grandmother the following morning. "He asked what they talked about," I said. My grandmother put down her embroidery. She permitted herself a small, precise smile of the kind that has always meant in our family that things are proceeding exactly as anticipated. "He will be awkward about it for another fortnight," she said. "He always was a methodical boy. How many callers do we have scheduled?" "2 more that I know of." "Good. Make sure Aldous puts them in the guest book where he can see the dates." I was the instrument of my grandmother's campaign, and I played the role with enthusiasm. Miss Vane, for her part, was not playing any role at all. That was, I think, what made her so particular. She was courteous to Mr. Soane and to the gentleman who followed him, a Mr. Thorsby, of good family and moderate wealth, and a Mr. Pelhamwick, who was charming and widely considered an excellent catch, but she was not angling. She was not arranging herself for anyone's inspection. She read to my grandmother, she walked the grounds when the weather permitted. She discussed drainage surveys with an attention that was clearly genuine. And she was, as far as I could observe, entirely unaware that she had become the focal point of my brother's most determined campaign of studied indifference. Studied indifference, I should say, is exhausting to maintain. I know because I watched it tire him out. He began appearing at breakfast before his schedule required. He began taking the longer route through the east corridor to his study, which happened to pass the morning room where Miss Vane sat with my grandmother in the early hours. He asked me with elaborate casualness whether she had mentioned anything about her plans for the season. Did she intend to stay through Christmas? Had grandmother said anything about extending the arrangement? And I answered with equal casualness that I did not know, which was true, and that he might ask her himself, which caused him to look at me as if I had suggested something dangerous. He was not wrong, it was dangerous. Not in the way he meant, but in the way that mattered. The danger of asking was that the answer might matter to him, and things that mattered to him he could not manage with the system, and things he could not manage with the system frightened him in a way that the estate ledgers and the drainage surveys and the home farm never had. I think the moment he began to truly lose was a Tuesday, in the 3rd week of November, when Mr. Pelhamwick called for the 2nd time and was, by all observable evidence, making excellent progress. Miss Vane was laughing at something he had said, a real laugh, not the polite kind, the kind that reached her eyes, and Cassius, who had come into the drawing room on the pretext of asking my grandmother about a letter, stopped in the doorway and went entirely still for a moment in the way that a man goes still when he has walked into a room and found something that rearranges his understanding of it. He delivered the letter. He departed. At dinner he said almost nothing, which was unusual even for him. Afterward he went to the library, and when I looked in at 9 o'clock the ledgers were open and untouched. She was laughing at something Pelhamwick said, I mentioned. I noticed, Cassius said. He is a good-tempered man. Evidently, his income is quite comfortable. Aldous, he set down his pen. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has run out of road. What is grandmother doing? It was not a question. It was a statement of a conclusion he had finally reached. What makes you think she is doing anything? I said. Because I know her, and because 3 eligible gentlemen have appeared at Thornhollow in a fortnight, and because she is watching everything with the specific expression she uses when she has arranged something and is waiting for the arrangements to mature. He pressed his fingers together. She brought Miss Vane here on purpose. She brought Miss Vane here because she needed a companion. She brought Miss Vane here, Cassius said, because she is 82 years old and she has decided the matter of my marriage requires her personal attention, and she has found a woman she considers suitable and has installed her in my house, and is now producing gentlemen callers to apply pressure. He said this last with the suppressed energy of a man who cannot decide whether to be furious or impressed. She has always had excellent instincts, I offered. She has always had intolerable presumption. Those are often the same thing in our family. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with the careful control of someone deciding something, I will not be managed. Of course not, I said. He said good night, and I went upstairs feeling quite strongly that things were about to become worse before they became better, and that my grandmother would be vindicated before Christmas. I was right about everything except the timing. What I had not accounted for, what my grandmother, brilliant as she was, had also not fully accounted for was Miss Vane herself. She had not come to Thornhollow with any expectations beyond a position, a salary, and the small dignity of being useful. She had been in enough houses by then to know the difference between being valued and being deployed, and she was not, it emerged, willing to be the latter. She told me herself in the orangery on a gray Thursday morning when frost had settled on the glass, and the gardener's boy was moving slowly among the lemon trees. I had gone there to read, and found her there already, not reading but sitting with her hands in her lap and a letter on the table beside her, and the expression of someone who has made a decision and is resting before the effort of carrying it out. I asked her what was wrong. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think your grandmother is a remarkable woman, and I have been very glad of this position. But I also think she has a particular design for this visit that does not quite include my own wishes in it, and I am not able to stay through Christmas in good conscience, knowing it. I am going to write to her this morning and give her my notice. I thought you should know first, since you have been kind. I put down my book. She means well, I said, which was inadequate. I know she does, Miss Vane said. That is the difficulty. If she were unkind or dishonest, I would simply go and feel nothing. But she has been very good to me, and I have been glad to be here in ways I did not expect. She looked out at the frost. That is precisely why I need to leave. I understood then. My grandmother's scheme had worked more thoroughly than she had intended. Miss Vane had noticed my brother, and had decided with the same quiet practicality she brought to everything, that noticing him was a luxury she could not afford. He was the Duke of Thornhallow. She was a debtor's daughter earning her keep as a companion. His grandmother's scheming would not change those facts, and she would not let herself pretend otherwise. I said, I think my brother has also noticed you. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, very gently, Lord Aldous, I am quite sure your brother is grateful for his grandmother's companionship and finds me adequate. I have had the benefit of his opinion on that score. The word adequate hit me like cold water. She had heard it. Of course she had heard it. Houses are not private, and words travel. He had called her adequate on the day I arrived, and she had been in the house 2 days and heard it second-hand and filed it away in the place where people keep the things they cannot afford to feel. I found my brother before noon. I found him as usual at his desk. I sat down without being invited and said, You called her adequate. He looked up, something shifted in his face. What? Your first assessment of Miss Vane. You told me she seemed adequate. I watched him. She heard. Cassius set down his pen. He did not speak for a moment. He looked at the desk. He had the expression of a man being shown, with perfect clarity, the exact moment at which he made the wrong choice and the cost it has accrued since. When? He said. The first week. She has been in this house for 6 weeks, knowing that is your opinion of her. She has been in this house 6 weeks, he said, with the flatness of a man doing sums and not admiring the total. He sat very still. I had seen Cassius in difficult negotiations, in the thick of the kind of legal crisis our father used to generate with remarkable frequency, in winters when the harvest numbers had been bleak, and he had always had the system to fall back on. Something to write down, a set of steps, a ledger to close and reopen with cleaner figures. There was no ledger for this. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to me and his hand against the frame, looking out at the frost-bright park, and said nothing for a while. Outside, one of the gardeners was moving through the kitchen garden, unhurried, dragging dead growth from the beds, and the world looked entirely unbothered by whatever had happened inside it. Then he said, She is leaving. She intends to give her notice this morning. He turned. I had not seen my brother's face quite like that before, not fearful exactly, but stripped of its usual management, the system set aside, the certainty gone. Where is she? The orangery, I said. Cassius, she is not going to be arranged. Not by grandmother and not by you if you go in there with some idea of. I am not going to arrange anything, he said. He was already moving. I am going to tell her she was wrong to hear it that way, and I was wrong to say it, and those are 2 different things, and both of them are true. I sat in the library and listened to the house. My grandmother appeared in the doorway approximately 6 minutes later, with the serene expression of a woman who has tracked every footstep. The orangery, I said. She sat down and picked up her embroidery. Good, she said. I was beginning to think I would have to arrange a fire. I do not know precisely what my brother said in the orangery, because I was not there, and because neither he nor Miss Vane ever gave me a full account, and because there are things that happen between people that are theirs alone and ought to stay that way. What I know is what I could observe from the library window, which faced the side garden and afforded a partial view of the orangery's glass panels, and what Cassius told me afterward in pieces over several days, in the way that a private man tells a story he has not yet learned to tell. He went in through the east door. She looked up from the table, and he saw immediately that she had been crying not recently, but the recent aftermath of it, the careful composure that goes over tears like a coat over a shivering person. This undid, he told me, every prepared sentence he had assembled on the way across the house. He had planned to say that he believed she had been misled about his intentions, and that he would like to speak plainly, and that she ought not to leave. None of that came out in the right order. What came out first was, I called you adequate. She said, You did. He said, I was wrong. She looked at him, she was very still. He said, I said it because I did not wish to be a man who had noticed you, and I have spent 6 weeks being that man anyway, badly, while pretending I was something else. Which makes me a fool, and I am aware of that, and I am not asking you to, I am not asking for anything that you do not wish to give. But I cannot let you leave believing that word is what I think of you. She said, "What do you think of me?" He told me he could not account for what happened then with any system he had available to him. He said the light was falling through the frosted glass in long, pale lines, and the frost on the lemon trees made everything very quiet, and she was looking at him with those steady gray eyes, and he had spent 6 weeks arranging himself away from this moment, and here it was anyway. He said, "I think you are the most clear-sighted person I have met in a very long time. I think you have more courage in the way you carry your circumstances than I have had in a decade of managing mine. I think that when you corrected me about the Southfield drainage, I wanted to argue with you for 10 minutes and then ask you every question I had been too proud to ask anyone." He paused. "I think I have given grandmother entirely too much credit for this, because I do not believe she manufactured the fact that I would rather talk to you than do anything in the world I have otherwise arranged for myself. That part was not her doing." Miss Vane was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your grandmother is very proud of this scheme." "My grandmother," Cassius said, "will be insufferable about it for the rest of her life, and I will probably deserve every minute of it." I do not know if she laughed at that. I suspect she did. I know that when I looked toward the orangery some 20 minutes later, they were still there, her sitting, him drawn up in the chair across from her, both of them leaning slightly forward in the way people lean when they have forgotten the room around them. My grandmother's needle moved steadily. She did not look up. "He's talking to her," I said. "I know," she said. "How did you know she was right for him?" She set down the embroidery and looked at me over the tops of her spectacles with the expression of a woman who has been answering this kind of question for 60 years and remains perplexed that it is still asked. "Because she does not need him," she said. "She has managed without him perfectly well, and she will manage without him again if she must, and she would never pretend otherwise for the sake of a comfortable position. He has spent 15 years being needed for the estate, for the tenants, for the accounts, for everything his father ruined. He has never been wanted by someone who does not need him to be anything other than himself." She picked up the needle again. "That is what I gave him. The rest was always going to be his own work." I thought about that for a long time. The rest, as it happened, was not simple. My brother was methodical even about this, which meant he was not going to sweep anyone off their feet in an orangery and presume the matter settled. What happened in the weeks following was more like the careful undoing of a careful man. Walks that extended past their scheduled length, dinner conversations that moved well past the hour he ordinarily retired. A Tuesday afternoon when I came into the long gallery and found them standing at the window over the frozen park. Not speaking, just standing, with 3 inches of December air between them and the quality of it very different from any air I had observed in that room before. Mr. Pelhamwick called once more and was, with perfect courtesy, allowed to understand that the situation had changed. Mr. Soane wrote a note wishing Miss Vane well. My grandmother received both developments with the equanimity of a general whose battle plan has executed as intended. On a Saturday in the 2nd week of December, my brother asked me to come to the library. He was standing by the desk, and there was a ring on the desk, not a grand ring, nothing theatrical, but a ring that had belonged to our mother, and that he had evidently taken from the case in his study. He looked at it with the expression of a man revising his system to include something he had previously left out. He said, "I am going to ask her." I said, "Good." He said, "She may say no." I said, "She won't." "You cannot know that." "Cassius," I said, "I have been watching her watch you for 6 weeks. Ask her." He picked up the ring. He looked at it for a moment more. Then he went out. I stayed in the library. My grandmother appeared in the doorway approximately 4 minutes later. "Library," I said. "The long gallery," she said. "She is sitting with her book." We listened to the house. My grandmother's hands for once were still. I will tell you what Cassius told me, because he told me all of it, which is the most he has ever told me of anything. And I believe he did it because he had been carrying the weight of so many private things for so long that, when one of them became good and warm, he needed it to exist somewhere outside himself. She was sitting at the far end of the gallery with her book and the afternoon light coming thin through the windows, and she looked up when she heard him, and she marked her page with the deliberateness of someone giving herself a moment to prepare for whatever is coming. He sat down in the chair across from her. He did not pace, he did not deliver a prepared speech. He said, "I have been thinking about what I said in the orangery." She said, "So have I." He said, "I meant all of it, and I have not stopped meaning it since, which is, for me, information." He set the ring on the table between them. He did not push it toward her. He said, "I am not asking because grandmother arranged it, or because the season requires it, or because the estate wants a mistress, or because of anything in the system. I am asking because you are the person I most want to be talking to, and I would like that to continue for the rest of my life if you are willing." She looked at the ring, she looked at him. She said, "You are still going to be very difficult to argue with." "Yes," he said. "And you will have opinions about the drainage," she said. "I will," he said. "But so will you, and you will usually be right, and I have decided I can tolerate that." She picked up the ring. He told me she looked at it for a long time in the way that someone looks at a thing they are trying to be sure they believe, and then she looked at him with those steady gray eyes and said, "Ask me, then, properly." He did, she said, yes. He told me afterward that when she said it, the whole elaborate machinery of himself, the schedule, the ledgers, the 15 years of careful management, went very quiet, the way a large house goes quiet when all the fires are lit and everyone is finally home. He had not known until that moment how much noise the system made, or how long he had been mistaking that noise for the sound of a life. My grandmother, when I told her, set down her embroidery, folded her hands in her lap, and permitted herself a silence of satisfied completeness that lasted almost a minute. Then she said, "I suppose he will spend the rest of his life insisting he made up his own mind." "I suspect he will," I said. "He did," she said, quite firmly. "Eventually." She picked up the needle. "That is the part he never quite understands. I gave him the opportunity. He had to choose it himself, and he did, and I would not take that from him for anything." She glanced at me sideways. "But I was right about the girl." "You were," I said. "I am always right about people," she said. "That is why they find me so irritating." She was right about that, too. I have watched my brother these 11 years since, watched him at the long table at Thornhallow with Isolde at the far end, the two of them talking over the estate reports while the candles burn low. Watched him on the park in early spring with his hand against the small of her back in that particular way he has, as if some part of him is always making sure she is still there. Watched him argue with her about the Southfield drainage and lose and look, while losing, like a man who has unexpectedly found himself exactly where he wants to be. He told me once, years in, that what he had not understood about the system was that it had been built to protect him from loss, and that protecting himself from loss had nearly cost him the only thing he actually wanted. My grandmother, who was 91 by then and in full command of everything, said when she heard this account, "He says it as if it is a revelation. I knew that in 1843. She was right about everything to the last. But Cassius made his own choice, in the long gallery, with the light going thin through the winter windows and a ring on the table between them. He made it because he could not manage himself out of it, and because she was worth more than the system, and because he had finally arrived at the only kind of courage that had ever mattered to him. The kind that admits, plainly and without the comfort of his ledgers or his schedule or his careful arrangements, what he cannot live without. That is the whole of it. That is what an 82-year-old woman with a cane and intolerable instincts gave my brother, a single necessary occasion for honesty. He has never forgiven her for being right. He is also the happiest man I know.